Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Kris. So, I have a vacation planned. And on that vacation, I am going to be passing by St. Louis, where William Tecumseh Sherman's buried. And so I decided I wanted to look up William Tecumseh Sherman. And I found this video. Now, I've seen other reactions to it, but I decided I'd go ahead and do it. Now, it's one guy. It's Atun-Shei Films, I believe is what the name is. And he plays both Union soldier and Confederate soldier. I think he's from the North, and he moved south. Something like that. I've been heard it's if you're from the South, apparently you're probably not going to really like it. That's what I've been told. But I'm going to break this into two parts because I don't like long videos. So I'm going to go ahead and start this, and we'll see how it is. And he does a couple of the series is called Checkmate Lincolnites. So let's see.
So Johnny Reb, what should we talk about on this episode?
Black Confederates?
No.
The glorious reputation of Robert E. Lee?
No.
That whole thing about how the South only lost because of the overwhelming resources of the North?
No.
Slaves were happy and treated well?
Ugh. God, no. That's batshit even for you.
True. I'm a cartoon character, not an idiot. Oh, what about Sherman's march on Atlanta when he bumped?
The Confederacy was not bad. I have ancestors that fought and died for that cause. And I will let you know that it hurts me to know that disrespect the CSA. What about Sherman's march on Atlanta when he burned everything in his path? I'm sure to you it's not a war crime because you have a unionized tunnel vision. Okay.
Burned everything in his path. I'm sure to you that's not a war crime because you have unionized tunnel vision.
So war crime is a really loaded term, and in this case, blatant hyperbole. But that's not completely crazy to say. Some of Sherman's boys did some pretty fucked up shit.
Oh yeah.
Checkmate, Lincolnites! What you got there, Billy Yank?
Why, this is my brand new Witchfinder General t-shirt. A truly high quality item I acquired at a reasonable price from the Atun-Shei Films merch store.
That's the man who slapped me.
It is. What's that you're wearing?
Why, this is my Checkmate Lincolnites t-shirt, which is currently available in both Yankee Blue and Rebel Gray.
Wow, that looks really comfortable.
It's actually a little bit scratchy. I don't know about the... it's incredibly comfortable. I couldn't be happier with my purchase from www.teespring.com/store/Atun-Shei Films.
That's right, Johnny. At teespring.com/stores/Atun-Shei Films, you'll find shirts, hoodies, mugs, even phone cases featuring your favorite characters and inside jokes from the channel. Each item features classy original artwork that you won't be embarrassed to wear out in public.
And that's not all. Order before midnight Central American time tonight and get 10% off your purchase with the promo code Uncle Billy.
Oh, he's got a gun to the guy's head.
But my generous patrons get the best deal of all. For the foreseeable future, $5 or more patrons get 25% off with a secret promo code visible only to them.
That's an incredible deal.
I know! Go to www.teespring.com/store/Atun-Shei Films now and get a piece of history shipped right to your door.
Who would wear this? How embarrassing.
Wait, who are we going to talk about again?
Sheridan, right? Wasn't it Sheridan? Slocum? Sickles.
Sherman.
That's right. You gonna talk about the memes?
How could I not talk about the memes?
Oh, way down south in the land of traitors, rattlesnakes and alligators.
Ridiculous Yankee lies, celebrating a man who brought untold suffering on the South.
Come on, man, that's not fair. The memes are clearly tongue-in-cheek. You know how you guys consider Stonewall Jackson to be like the embodiment of Confederate big dick energy? Well, it's the same with us and Sherman. It's not so much a celebration of Sherman himself, but more our idea of Sherman. A fiery force of patriotic nature that kicks slave owner ass. And unlike you guys, we understand that distinction. In many ways, Sherman was absolutely awful. We don't have to delude ourselves about him like you do about Jackson and Lee.
Even if that's true, you don't have to go very far into our Sherman posting to see all kinds of drivel insulting modern-day Southerners, or conservatives.
Well, there's literally a community rule in that subreddit that forbids pointless South bashing.
What about the other Sherman meme groups on Facebook and elsewhere? What about your own fan base? Are you going to deny that there's an undercurrent of anti-Southern, anti-rural prejudice among the so-called Union Gang?
If Lee, Early, and Davis had been hanged like the traitors they were, this country would be better off now.
See?
LOL. The South will rise again at some point. Individually, in industrial-grade man lifts, their cavalry consisting of 500-pound burger receptacles maneuvering on their rascal scooters they stole at Walmart.
How dare you, sir?
Inbred, low-IQ, Southern hick freaks.
Oh my god. I'm so sorry, dude.
Damn you, sir. If I had a glove, I would throw it at your feet this instant.
And I wouldn't blame you. What kind of unbelievable asshole can't distinguish between slave-owning Confederates and modern-day rural Southerners?
Furthermore,
good.
how do you come to terms with the fact that Sherman had no moral qualms about slavery and was quite a racist himself? His problem with us was that we declared...
I'll just say this. Virtually every white person in America at that time, minus John Brown, was pretty much a racist. John Quincy Adams, maybe not. John Adams, maybe not. But they probably didn't want a black person moving in next door to them. It's a vastly different time. We would consider that person racist by today's standards, but back then, yeah. Oh, he's one of those people that's, you know, he's a sympathizer or something, you know, like that would be a negative connotation thrown at him.
declared independence. Not that we supported slavery, I mean, states' rights.
That's true. Sherman lived in the South for years prior to the war and wasn't particularly anti-slavery.
Nope.
He did think that it was an inefficient and outdated labor system, though, and thought it was pretty much inevitable that slave states would be overwhelmed by a coalition of free states in Congress. He probably had a point.
Exactly. Should the South have won, slavery was on its way out, collapsing under its own weight. Would have ended anyhow.
That's certainly a valid what-if scenario, but there's less evidence for it than you might think. Yes, certainly, slavery was on the way out globally, and abolitionism was on the rise. But I actually think that makes the Confederacy look even worse and more reactionary, because you can't simultaneously make the argument that slavery would have gone away on its own, and we can't judge the Confederates for keeping slaves because that was the norm back then. But in fact, slavery in the South was still going strong in 1860. That year, the net value of American slaves was approximately $2.5 billion. And slaves weren't just valuable assets, they were investments. The cost of paying for a single slave for life was way cheaper than paying a wage worker, even in the later antebellum days when the price of slaves rose to record heights. And many slave owners purchased women to use them basically as brood mares. The children of slaves also became slaves, and the masters worked them or sold them for enormous profit. Slavery was so...
They didn't sell all, not every slave owner sold the family to break them up. A lot did, but not everyone. I'll argue that it's terrible to own slaves, but they didn't all. Some had more of a heart than others.
So lucrative that I find it highly unlikely that it would have ended without significant political pressure from abroad. And in my opinion, probably not for at least a generation after a hypothetical Confederate victory.
But what about industrialization? Surely a victorious Confederacy. My heart flutters at the thought. Surely it would be forced to change to keep up with the rest of the world.
And secessionists gave that a lot of thought. First of all, it's not like agriculture ceased to be profitable once industry overtook it. We still rely heavily on agriculture today, primarily to feed ourselves. Bread isn't grown in a lab. And Confederates understood that a slave society wasn't necessarily incompatible with an industrial economy. In fact, they saw it as a plus. Unlike the North or Great Britain, they could urbanize and industrialize with an already subservient workforce and not have to worry about class conflict. The North industrialized using immigrants and the rural poor. Why couldn't the South have done the same with slaves? Confederates knew that their economy had to modernize, but they correctly understood that they wouldn't need to sacrifice slavery to do that.
We're filming.
In their public discourse, speeches, editorials, and pamphlets, the planter class placed much less importance on their Jeffersonian agrarian ideals and much more on them gaining economic independence from the North through internal industrialization. And they believed the best way to do this was through the directive of the state, not private interests. As we've talked about before, the Confederacy was way more centralized than most people give it credit for, and there's ample evidence to suggest that in the event of a Southern victory, the central...
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What? What did I hear? What did I hear? Let me throw on the captions. I think I heard, how do you know how big Cornelius' phallus is? Is that what I heard?
On them gaining economic independence from the North through internal industrialization. And they believed the best way to do this was through the directive of the state, not private interests. As we've talked about before, the Confederacy was way more centralized than most people give it credit for, and there's ample evidence to suggest that in the event of a Southern victory, the Central Confederate...
You know how big Cornelius' phallus is? Okay. It didn't show it on closed captions, but I heard it.
Government would have become even stronger as it directed private interests to create economic and industrial power that would effectively compete with that of the North.
So, Sherman.
Yes, Sherman, what exactly is your problem with him?
What's my problem? What is my problem? Sherman's march made what the Nazis did to Russia and the Japanese did to everyone look sweet and pleasant.
That's crazy talk, and you know it. I'm not going to defend Sherman's mistreatment of civilians, which definitely happened, and I'm sure we'll get to it.
Damn right we will.
But let's discuss this within the bounds of reality. There's just no evidence to corroborate the post-war legends of Union regulars committing mass rape and murder. There's just not. To the contrary, at the beginning of the war, President Lincoln and many Northern politicians actually urged the military to tread lightly in the South. They believed that the Confederacy was not a sovereign enemy nation, but a region in rebellion, and so Southern civilians had the same rights and privileges that Northern ones did. They also...
He didn't want to... Sorry, chewing on ice. He didn't want to upset the apple cart, so to speak, with the regular Southerner. You know, he separated the civilian from the military. So, you know, and as you would do, but we know, being in Iraq and Afghanistan, you can separate them, but that doesn't mean that they're not doing what they can to still affect an outcome that would go against your side. You know, they're fighting for their home side. Sorry, I had to adjust that
believed, erroneously, that most lower-class Southerners had strong Unionist sentiments, and they didn't want to alienate those people by abusing them. So, for the most part, at the beginning of the war, the Union Army treated Southern civilians with remarkable cordiality and restraint.
Cordiality? Restraint? You do realize this was an army, correct? Thousands of young men with guns? How do you think these mud-seal Yankees ate? They stole from civilians. And y'all didn't just stop with food, you took valuables too. Anything you could carry.
That's a great point, but Confederate soldiers stole from Southern civilians too. Mostly just for food, but during the Atlanta campaign and the March to the Sea, Joe Wheeler's Confederate cavalry was infamous for plundering private homes for money, jewelry, trophies, and this disgusted other Confederate units.
Whataboutism drinking game.
Sure, but we can't have this discussion unless we establish a distinction between unbridled violent cruelty on one hand and the foraging and theft that accompanied every army during this period on the other.
Cordiality.
I would say that it happened if the Confederates had went up north, Lee going into Pennsylvania, he lived off the land. And I'm sure that if the Union got far enough away from its supply chain, it would have lived off the land. Not to hurt the people, but there's a war going on, man. And if we don't get food from you right now, yeah, it's gonna hurt. But if we don't get food from you right now, then we don't know where we're going to be able to get our next meal. And they're living off the land. So if we have to go back to a supply chain that's out of the way, they're going to cause havoc and run through here and pillage and loot and destroy. So it sucks on both sides if you're a civilian.
And restraint. Well, I never. Just more northern propaganda trying to prop up Lincoln and trying to justify why they invaded a sovereign nation, burning houses, barns, killing livestock, along with the rape and murder of thousands of innocent people.
So the second thing didn't happen on anywhere even close to that scale, but the first sure did. And there were reasons for that. Keeping Southern property intact just seemed like good PR for the Union Army at first. But then the Confederates started winning. And they kept winning. And the more time they spent on campaign, the more a lot of United States soldiers realized that lower class Southerners really detested them. So all of a sudden, the idea of conciliatory warfare didn't really make strategic sense anymore. Sherman himself underwent a drastic change of perspective on this issue. As commander of federal forces in Kentucky late in 1861, he severely punished federal soldiers who stole from civilians. He even forcibly returned fugitive slaves back to their masters. But over the next 2 years, his heart began to harden against the South. He came to believe that there was no real distinction between the Confederate government and military who had started the war and the civilian Southern populace who were complicit in it. They were all rebels, guilty of treason. To Sherman, there was no point trying to win hearts and minds. The only way to crush Southerners' wartime spirit was through overwhelming destructive force. By November of 1863, Sherman...
I just want to say, to add on to that, in World War II, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, Nagasaki, Hiroshima. And they did that to speed up the end of the war. So if what happened there was, if what we did to Japan was right in the context of it ended the war, then what Sherman did was right because it sped up the ending of the war. Both are bad, but to have massive death and pillage and destruction and all that stuff could have saved thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more lives down the road, because eventually it just really just sucked the air out of any potential continuation. I apologize, I'm talking a lot, but I'm just, and I'm obviously on the Union side, but I'm trying to be fair in what I'm saying back and forth.
And believed firmly that
it is none of our business to protect a people that has sent all its youth, and arms and horses, and all that is of any account to war against us. The people have done all the harm they can, so let them reap the consequences.
He always looks like he just woke up. Like he just got out of bed. He always has bedhead.
That's right. He advocated total war tactics against the South, directly targeting homes.
That's misleading. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were examples of total war. Total war, by definition, is the most horrifying and extreme method of warfare possible. Sherman was ruthless. Yes, he was hard-handed, but he wasn't indiscriminately violent. There's a distinction there. Besides, the concept of total war didn't even exist in the 19th century.
Give it a name. Scorched earth, hard war. Don't it more or less describe the same thing? The fact is, Sherman cut a swath of destruction and terror from Chattanooga to Atlanta, from there to the sea, and up through the Carolinas. That is historic fact.
No doubt.
A shocking and unprecedented display of violence from the meddling Yankee.
To be fair, most of Sherman's soldiers spent the entire march to the sea either well, marching or in camp. It was the bummers, those stragglers and foragers on the outskirts of the army, who truly lived up to the lost cause stereotype of the rampaging, pillaging Union soldier. They burned empty houses and looted inhabited ones. They taunted, robbed, and insulted Southern civilians, rich and poor, black and white. Violence was uncommon on the march, but not negligibly rare, namely beatings, rapes, sometimes even murders. And that's not defensible. As students of history, we should attempt to understand that violence, but we should never try to condone it or defend it. And there's also a lot of disagreement about the extent of these violent crimes. Personally, I think they absolutely happened. I don't see how they couldn't have in that sort of situation with an army marching through a rich countryside. In particular, the rape. That's a crime that more often than not just goes unreported. Sherman himself fervently denied these charges in his memoirs, though I don't entirely believe him.
No doubt many acts of pillage were committed by these parties of foragers, usually called bummers, for I have since heard of jewelry taken from women and the plunder of articles that never reached the commissary. But these acts were exceptional and incidental. I never heard of any cases of murder or rape, and no army could have carried along sufficient food and forage for a march of 300 miles, so that foraging in some shape was necessary. The country was sparsely settled, with no magistrates or civil authorities who could respond to requisitions, as is done in all the wars of Europe, so that this system of foraging was simply indispensable to our success.
And you know, it's important to note that the viciousness of Sherman's march didn't really surprise anyone at the time.
Well, it probably surprised its victims.
There are lots of scary Sherman quotes, like, "War is cruelty, war is hell," but less well known are the similar sentiments that were advocated by people on both sides since the beginning of the war. We have this idea, this romantic notion that men who fought in the Civil War did so reluctantly, citing these lofty goals like unity or state pride. That's certainly how that generation wanted to see themselves. Gentlemen warriors fighting a civilized conflict. But scratch the surface and you will find a much more ugly and viciously sectarian truth. In April of 1861, a prominent judge from Wisconsin gave a speech in which he said,
"The Union Army must restore New Orleans to its native marshes, then march across the country, burn Montgomery to ashes, and serve Charleston in the same way. We must starve, drown, burn, shoot the traitors."
And that was by no means an unpopular opinion among your rampaging Yankee soldiers. Many Northerners spoke openly of exterminating the people of the South.
Wow, that's kind of brutal. I think I'm going to go back to that comment, and that is where I will pause it. We'll pick right up, and we will finish this video. This is different. It's kind of entertaining. Yeah, if you're an American and you're in the South, I understand you're going to have different views of some of this stuff, but it's still interesting to kind of hear. But I'm going to go ahead and end this here. Like and subscribe. Sherman's March, food, blah, blah, blah. Have a good day. Have a good night.